Now we got a nice Oberst Task from Bodo, and here are his questions. Why were the Japanese attacking the Aleutians during the Battle of Midway? The Midway invasion should bait the US carriers while risk a diversion. And then, why committing a sizable force including carriers to another operation when you're planning a decisive battle? So let's tackle the first question. Why were the Japanese attacking the Aleutians during the Battle of Midway? It is important here to see that the attack on Midway, Operation MI, and the attack on the Aleutians, Operation AL, were two operations that were conducted at about the same time, yet this was due to a compromise, to quote from Shattered Sword, in return of the General Headquarters' grudging adoption of Midway as the objective for the next operation. Yamamoto was shortly forced to accede to first one and later a second of the Naval Staff's demands. The first, which greatly affected Yamamoto's operational planning for his decisive battle, was an agreement to incorporate an attack on the Aleutian Island into the overall scheme for June's operation. Now the idea behind the Aleutians operation was to forestall both air and naval attacks from the United States against northern Japan. And this brings us to the second question. Namely, the Midway invasion should bait the US carriers while risk a diversion. This includes an assumption into the question, namely that the attack on the Aleutians was a diversion, which was assumed by the US forces at the time, and this is pointed out by Symonds. Though at the time the Americans assumed that this was a diversion for the Midway campaign, it was a standalone operation with quite limited goals, the occupation of the islands of Attu and Kiska in the western island chain in order to expand the empire's defensive perimeter. This view as a diversion was quite some time repeated in history books, but it is wrong. This is one of the reasons why, if possible, I always recommend using current books by good scholars, because they often remove or clarify older errors. Shattered Sword notes the following. Western accounts of the battle have generally characterized Operation AL against the Aleutians as being an elaborate diversion in support of Operation MI, the attack on Midway. According to this interpretation, AL was designed to lure the US fleet out of Pearl Harbor, such that it could be intercepted and engaged north of Hawaii as it moved to relieve the Aleutians. However, this rendering of Japanese intentions is incorrect. In Shattered Sword it is further clarified. They note that in Japanese sources there is no mention that Operation AL was a feint or a diversion operation. Similarly, it is not in Nagumo's report on Midway nor in the post-war interview with Yamamoto's staff officer. Yet even if one does not have access to Japanese sources, there is a more obvious giveaway, namely that to lure out the US carriers, the operation against the Aleutians would have to start several days earlier, since the Americans would need some time to move from Pearl Harbor to the Aleutians and get the carriers out of the way. Now the third question also yields some interesting answers. Well, the question was, why committing a sizable force including carriers to another operation when you're planning a decisive battle? For this, let's take a short look at the ships committed according to Shattered Swords Appendix 11. There were 3 heavy cruisers, 3 light cruisers, 2 light carriers and several destroyers and support craft assigned. Which is not a small force, but also not too significant. Yet here the devil lies in the details, so let's look at the 2 light carriers, namely the Ryu and the Unio. The Ryu was rather small. This meant that its elevators could not operate the D3A1 Val dive bombers. Now the main issue with the Unio was that it was rather slow. Symonds notes 24 knots, whereas Wikipedia notes 25.5 knots. In comparison, the slowest Japanese carrier at Midway was the Kaga with 28.3 knots according to Shattered Sword. So she would have slowed down the Kido Butai at Midway. Yet similar to the Ryu, she was also limited in terms of her aircraft. Although Unio was larger and had better aircraft handling facilities, but she was hampered by her slow speed of 25 knots. This meant that she was not considered capable of operating torpedo aircraft because in light wind conditions she wasn't fast enough to create a relative wind over the bow necessary to launch them. So in short, the answer is the Aleutian campaign was not a diversion or a feint attack, and there are no indications for this in Japanese sources so far. Nor does it make it any sense from the chronological point of view, since for it to work, it would have to be started a few days earlier. In this case, the Western wartime interpretation went unchecked into history books. Additionally, although the Aleutian force contained 2 small carriers. These were limited in effectiveness in terms of aircraft loadout, yet more importantly in terms of speed. Big thank you here to Bodo and all my Patreon supporters. An additional thank you to Jack for sending me the book of Symonds on Midway. As always, source the link in the description. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you for watching and see you next time.